save it to, and you're saving it to Zoom?
I have no idea where it's saving it. I clicked on the button. I don't know what it's doing because I
I think
haven't
it's saving
recorded
it
it
to Zoom.
before.
In that case, wonderful. Once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Los Angeles Birders webinar for June 18th. Thank you again for everyone who is a member and is supporting Lab. We appreciate your support. It's inexpensive and it goes a long way in helping us guide us into what we need to do. Lab lots offers these wonderful webinars, student learning opportunities, community science involvement. We have field trips. We have lots of wonderful things going on. So thank you all very, very much. And with that, I'd like to have Mark introduce our speaker for tonight.
Oh, I didn't know that I was doing this. Okay, well, Lance Benner really needs no introduction. Lance has been birding around Southern California and other places for decades, and he's well known to people in LA County. Lance is an expert on of many things, owls and mountain birds, and also sound recordings. Um, and when Lance is not birding, he studies asteroids at JPL, and um, and we're just very happy to have Lance and his expertise to tell us about mountain birds and their songs. So take it away, Lance.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mark and Ron. All right, let's see if we can do this. Are you seeing PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And let's see. And now it should be in full screen mode, I hope.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So thanks everybody for coming. Our apologies for the technical difficulties. Hopefully the presentation won't have any more of them. But we actually did practice this a little bit. So I'm going to talk about some more confusing bird sounds, especially songs, that are found in the mountains of Southern California, which it basically means like, the Southern Sierra Nevada, the transverse and peninsular ranges. And for this talk, we're going to concentrate a lot on birds that are at altitudes generally above maybe like 6,000 feet or so. So I'm hoping that during this talk, the two sonograms that are in front of you on this first slide, which are not labeled, at least they're not labeled with the name of the species, will become a little bit more clear to you. You perhaps might even be able to figure out what they are. Give you a bit of a preview. Here is a recording of one of these two species. This was recorded in the San Gabriel Mountains recently.
When you shared, Lance, did you check off the box for sound?
Is it not sound?
We're not hearing it.
You're not hearing it?
Nope.
Correct.
Okay. That seemed to work fine the other night. All right, folks, so we are having some issues. Do you happen to remember where that box is?
Yes. When you share your video, before you click the go button, there'll be a couple of checkoff.
Way at the bottom.
Got it. All right, thank you. Yes, we want to allow that. Okay. Do we now see PowerPoint again? Oops.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we now see PowerPoint.
Let's try the sound again.
Yes.
Did you hear anything?
Yes, this time we heard it.
Yes. This time you heard it. Okay. All right, let me play that again. So this is a recording of one of the two species that you're seeing in the sonogram in front of you. Okay, so we'll come back to some recordings shortly here. I just wanted to kind of set the stage for some of the things we're going to talk about. So here's a brief outline of what we're going to do. We're going to basically go over some of the more common montane species in Southern California, whose vocalizations, especially whose songs, tend to be confusing. Some of these are species that a lot of people find confusing. Some of them are species that I find confusing, so perhaps you will too. This is not a complete list. There are others that I just did not have time to put on here. I'll briefly allude to those a little bit later on. So we're going to go through the introduction, which is what's happening right now. And then we're going to spend some time with thick-billed fox sparrows and green-tailed towhees. The outline says we're going to do purple finches and so forth next, but I'm actually going to do the juncos, chipping sparrows, and orange-crowned warblers after the sparrows, the fox sparrows. Then we'll do the finches and the solitaires. And then we're going to talk about red crossbills and things that people confuse those with, like pygmy nuthatch and olive-sided flycatcher. And then we're going to spend a fair bit of time talking about recording bird sounds with apps on phones, primarily with the Merlin app, but also with some other ones such as Song Meter Touch, Voice Record Pro, and BirdNet. Those apps are being used a lot these days, and so I wanted to go over them. This is information that we only briefly touched upon when I did the two-part sound recording presentations in the fall of 2020. But a number of things have changed, and a lot of people are using Merlin, especially right now. So I wanted to go over it and describe some of the pluses and minuses, and then we'll wrap things up at the end and take questions. So let's see, and it's not advancing. Mark and Ron, are you seeing it advance?
No, I'm still seeing it on
No.
the outline.
Oh, okay, there it went.
There you
Oh,
go.
there we go. Okay.
I'm not sure why it wasn't advancing. Okay, well, so it looks like maybe it's a little bit slow for unknown reasons. So we're going to be looking at a lot of audio spectrograms, also known as sonograms. Here is an example of one. So in this particular figure, time is on the horizontal axis, and the units here are given in seconds across the top. So this one spans just over 5 seconds. Frequency or pitch is shown on the vertical axis with the scale over here on the left. The bottom is 0, and here the units are in hertz. Oops. And then it goes up to 10,000 hertz or 10 kilohertz, which is at the upper range of hearing for most people, at least younger people. So frequency is also often treated as synonymously with pitch. And in the way that I'm showing this here, the vocalizations by the birds are those dark curves on the figure, and the darker they are, the louder they are. And so there are distinctive patterns as a function of time. The whole thing is vaguely analogous to sheet music, for those of you who have perhaps a musical background. This particular sonogram shows several seconds of sounds made by black-chinned sparrow on the left. That's the series of calls that rapidly get closer and closer in time, and then followed immediately afterward by a lazuli bunting. And this was on Blue Ridge about a week and a half ago. So a little bit about logistics during the talk. So we're going to be using both PowerPoint and scrolling sonograms. And the scrolling sonograms I'm going to be using basically the eBird website to display those. So I'll be getting out of PowerPoint and then loading up the Safari browser. Actually, it's already loaded. We'll switch over to it. We'll play a bunch of recordings, and then we'll switch back to PowerPoint. And I'm doing this for each kind of group of similarly sounding species. So there are going to be several of these throughout the course of the talk, the ones that I mentioned in the outline. So again, please be patient as we switch. It does take a second to deal with this. And if we can, and we have questions and comments, please let's keep those until the end of the talk. So for each group of species, we're going to try to talk a little bit about the songs. There's some where I'm going to mention some of the calls. I had hoped to put more of that into the presentation, but I just ran out of time. So we're going to look at some sonograms first. then talk about them and a little bit about where the birds are, the habitats, elevation, seasonal singing patterns, and so forth, because that's another key thing for separating some of these confusing birds. And then play the scrolling sonograms afterward. So let's start with the thick-billed fox sparrows and the green-tailed towhees. And I'm specifically talking about thick-billed fox sparrows. Those are the ones that are widespread at high altitudes in, for example, the San Gabriel Mountains, the San Bernardinos, the southern Sierra Nevada, actually well up into the Sierra Nevada, around Mount Pinos, Fraser Mountain, and the San Jacinto Mountains and so forth. This is the species, the subspecies, if you will, that breeds in this area. Now, of course, during the winter, we can also have sooty fox sparrows and slate-colored fox sparrows in the area. In some future talk, we'll compare those. But here we're not doing that. Here we're just dealing with thick-billed fox sparrows and green-tailed towhees. So within the local mountains, they both are high-altitude birds, generally above 6,000 feet, often in places with montane chaparral that also have trees in them. In my experience, I tend to find the fox sparrows in the trees a bit more often than the towhees. The songs and calls of the other fox sparrows I just mentioned are different. They sound distinctly different. And late in the winter and early in the spring, all three of them are in chaparral habitat and montane habitat in this area. You can hear all three of them calling and singing, and they're all a little bit different. Again, we'll save that for some future talk. So the thick-billed fox sparrows and the green-tailed towhees are perhaps one of the most common sources of song confusion in this area. There can appear to be some overlap in how they sound, although I think broadly speaking, often the fox sparrows tend to start a little bit more emphatically. Fairly often, the beginning of a fox sparrow song might sound vaguely like an olive-sided flycatcher with the quick three beers, but then it transitions into this other much more complicated and melodic series of sounds that the flycatchers do not make. And really, they're very beautiful sounds as well. Both songs are highly variable. Just before the talk, I was kind of looking over some of my own recordings from different places that are only a few tens of miles apart, and the songs can be very different for birds of the same species. In addition, as the birds sing, individual birds vary their songs quite a bit, but they do also have patterns that repeat, sometimes with no variations, often with very minor ones. In addition, let's see, I mentioned the last bullet here that the start of the fox sparrow song can also be confused with olive-sided flycatchers with the quick three beers, and even with a little bit of the dusky flycatcher calls. Having said that, here are sonograms of each species. And so we have thick-billed fox sparrow at the top and the green-tailed towhee at the bottom. These were birds that were recorded on the same afternoon at the Buckhorn Day Use area. That's the picnic area, just right next to the campground up in the San Gabriel Mountains. And if you look at the sonograms, they actually look quite different. There's clearly a lot of structure in each one of them. And each one of these groups for each species is different. Like, so I have basically three loud groups here for each species. Each group looks different from the other ones for the same species. If I had shown you more of it, like maybe double the amount of time shown here, then some of them would have been repeating rather obviously. But these don't repeat very much, and that was intentional on my part to try to illustrate the variability. These, the green-tailed towhee songs in the bottom are all by the same individual, same bird, recorded at a distance of about 15 meters. The thick-billed fox sparrows at the top, mostly by the same individual. The really bold ones, the ones that are dark, which means loud, are the same individual, but there are some softer ones by a second or maybe even a third bird that are visible in the background. So one of the things that I started to notice when I struggled to figure out how to tell these apart was that the green-tailed towhees often have more trills in their songs. Both species do it, but the towhees do it more, and the trills tend to be fast. If you look on the bottom row, especially the one on the left, and also the one in the middle, there's a burst of trilling here, And it's so fast that your ear can't separate them out. Compared with something like this, and I don't know if you probably can't see my cursor, but over on the right, in the middle of the burst of song on the right for the green-tailed towhee, there were some vocalizations where, although they're quick, they take about half a second, and you can actually hear that with your ear. And then the trill after that isn't as fast as the ones earlier in the sonogram. If we look at the top
Lance, we
sonogram,
can see your cursor, by the
you can see it. Thank you.
Yes.
So if you look at the trill here in the middle for the thick-billed fox sparrow, just looking at it, you can see that the time gaps between each of these little vertical lines is wider than it is down here for the towhee. And so they sound a little different. It's not as rapid. And then there's another trill over here, but it's different. Sometimes the pitch of the trills sounds different to my ear, but they're variable. And these are just individuals at the same place. If on this same day when I went a mile down the road, I found towhees that sounded different still, and we're going to play examples of that. So as I was trying to learn how to figure these out, and my principal motivation to do that was I decided to adopt a breeding bird survey route across the high altitudes in the San Gabriel Mountains, basically starting at Table Mountain Campground and then going 25 miles west to Cloudburst Summit. And I started doing that in 2012. And so I had to figure out how to be able to tell these songs apart. And by that point, I was already into recording things. And so I went up there with my recording gear, and I just found a bunch of the birds that I could see at short range and recorded them and made notes to myself, dictated notes to myself on my recording so I could tell which was which, and then started studying them. And I went up there and practiced a couple of times before I actually did my first breeding bird survey. And then I would do a little bit of boning up every year before I went back, in part by listening to my own recordings and looking at the sonograms, and also by going up there 2 or 3 times before I did the survey to refresh my memory. It still takes me a little bit of time when I go back up each year. I can get the fox sparrows easily, but the towhees sometimes still give me a little bit of trouble. But the process of looking at them, watching them sing, recording them, and then looking at the sonograms was really useful. So that's one of the ways where Merlin and some of the other phone apps that generate sonograms can really help you learn these, is because they show you the sonogram as you are listening to it. Merlin also attempts to identify the species, which sometimes it gets right and sometimes it doesn't, but it still records it so you can still look at it. All of those different methods of reinforcing what you're experiencing help you learn it. Now, a few weeks ago, we had Tom Stevenson give a talk about a rather elaborate method for learning bird songs. I've never tried his method with these species. I'd be curious to know how he would apply it for these, where there's so much variation. If Tom happens to be tuning in, or if he happens to see a recording of this, please contact me, because I'd love to know how he would handle this. I don't know how to apply his method to these species. So here's a summary of some of the things that I've already been mentioning. The patterns do repeat for some of them. Fox sparrows seem to repeat a little more frequently in the sample of recordings that I have. But again, one of the best ways to learn them is to go into the field and spend time with them, looking at them while they're singing, recording them, and then looking at the sonograms. All these multiple techniques can help reinforce learning them. And practice it. I'm going to keep saying this. And as I mentioned to some people in our recent field trips, such as the one that Naresh and I did to the Chaparral field trip in the Santa Monica Mountains a couple of days ago, practicing and learning the songs is basically analogous, at least I think it's analogous to what I used to do when I obsessively listened to the Fleetwood Mac album Rumors when that first came out in the 1970s. I listened to it hundreds of times, and I learned everything because of that. I learned the songs really well because of that. I learned the order in which they appeared. I knew which song was the first one on the second side, you name it. With birds, it works that way in my brain as well. Just practicing it and spending time in the field. A little bit more before we listen to some recordings about the calls. So thick-billed fox sparrows also make a soft kind of tinking call. This is somewhat like a California towhee call, although those tend to be a bit more emphatic. And that was one of the things I wanted to add to the talk, but just didn't have time to put in. So we'll save that for some other time. At this time of the year, the fox sparrows are usually at a higher altitude than the California towhees. So if you're above like 6,000 feet, you hear that little tink call, it's probably a fox sparrow. if you're 5,000 feet and lower, it's almost certainly a California towhee. Green-tailed towhees make a number of calls, and the most well-known one is a sort of mewing call. And we do have an example of that one, which I'm going to play. So we're going to go through several examples of the calls. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing PowerPoint and start sharing Safari. And let's see if this works. So Mark and Ron, could one of you confirm that you now see a Safari browser with a sonogram?
Yes. Whoop,
Yes.
I did for a second. Now I see a fox sparrow, a red fox sparrow.
That is not what I wanted. Okay, this browser is very, very sensitive, and it switched. Maybe I can do that.
There we go.
Is the sonogram back?
Sonogram is back.
Okay, so this is one of the
Yes.
fox sparrows that I played earlier, but here we're gonna hear more of it. We'll start at the beginning. So it is this loud stuff here. There are other things on here too. There's another more distant fox sparrow. There's some soft calls on here by a black-throated gray warbler. But so you're going to see it's going to start with these emphatic calls here and then have some slow trills of various types, and then it's going to vary. And we'll let this go for about 30 seconds or so before we go to the next one. Second. Third one. So you can see how there are some patterns that repeat, especially the really emphatic, loud beginning sort of vocalizations and then some trills, although the trills here are fairly slow. So let's compare that with a green-tailed towhee. So again, Mark and Ron, could you confirm that you're now seeing green-tailed towhee?
Yep.
Yes.
Tail
All right.
sonogram.
Thank you. Yeah, so for those of you who are listening in, I'm asking for confirmation because this is a different approach to presenting the songs relative to what I've done with previous ones. And this particular browser and laptop is a lot more sensitive than the antiquated one that I normally use. And so it's very sensitive. All right, let's back this up so we can hear this. All right, here we go. This is a green-tailed towhee now. Some emphatic sounds in the beginning, but they're different. More trills. So there were two trills there at two different speeds and two different pitches. You notice how variable it is. So the patterns, especially when you see them as a sonogram, really do look different. Now, that one had a couple of emphatic opening notes that were more like a fox sparrow. And I know this wasn't because I was looking at the bird when I recorded it. It had a couple of trills on it. So we'll stop that one. So again, this was at the Buckhorn Day Use area. This was about a month ago. Here is a different one. This one, let's see if I can. Yeah, so this is from a few years ago. This was recorded about 1.5 miles, actually about 2.5 miles farther east along the Angeles Crest Highway. I'm near the Vista picnic area, or what's left of it. It kind of burned out in the fire 4 years ago. So this is a different different green-tailed towhee. Come on. And there are also lower frequency calls by a squirrel here. That's the squirrel. Again, multiple trills, generally faster trills than you see with the fox sparrows. In fact, emphatic calls, then trill, then emphatic call, then trill. And the fox sparrows don't do as much. So this particular location and the Buckhorn Day Use area where I was playing recordings from just before this have had birds singing in similar patterns for years. They may be the same individuals or descended from them. But some of their songs are are different. I mean, maybe it's short range geographic variation, or maybe it's just that they have a large repertoire and I haven't sampled it all yet. I'm not sure. Here is going to be another, let's see, I'm already doing that one. Another green-tailed towhee. This is also at the same location as the last one. This was a few weeks ago. There's a bit more background noise with this one, but the songs are different, which is why I wanted to present it. But here the trills are a lot slower. This is an area that burned extensively 4 years ago in the Bobcat. And the towhees are even more abundant than they used to be. Always a call. We're now living in areas that are dominated by poodle dogs. So not all of them have a lot of trills. This last one I played was only a little bit, and it was a slow trill. But they're distinctly different in appearance from what we were seeing with the fox sparrows. Okay, so the last thing I want to do with these two species is this. These are going to be green-tailed towhee calls. There were two of them. There were first these little warbling calls, and then they're going to be the somewhat well-known mew. Let's play that again. I didn't mean to start that soon. Try it again. So that last mew call is a really diagnostic green-tailed towhee sound. That's an easy way to tell them apart in the field. They will sometimes mix that in with the songs. These other calls are not very well known, and they're easy to overlook. In fact, some of them can be easily confused with violet-green swallows. I'll play these again. Okay, let's stop sharing here and do a little bit more with, let's see. I think I'm sharing. Let's see, where's my PowerPoint? Oh, here it is. Okay. So start this back up again. So getting back to the first slide that I showed you, here's what they were. I didn't tell you then, but now I'll reveal it. The one on the left was a thick-billed fox sparrow, and the one on the right that had double trills and a less emphatic beginning, that was the green-tailed towhee. So again, in terms of, things to take away to try to understand these and to separate them, there's really no substitute for experience in the field. But the act of recording them, such as with any one of the phone apps, especially if they generate a sonogram, is an invaluable way to learn them. Because then you can start to see the patterns, and that helps reinforce the differences. You start to listen for them as well as see them. It's this multiple lines of reinforcement I find very, very useful. There's no guarantee that will still work, but it should help. It really ought to help quite a bit. And of course, it also helps if you're also looking at the bird while you're seeing it and recording it. So give it a try. And, I'm eager to hear feedback from people who try to learn these and see how you do and see if this was useful to you. Okay, let's move on. And let's see. I guess it wants this way. We'll do it that way instead. Somehow the advanced buttons aren't working. Okay, so we're going to talk about chipping sparrows and dark-eyed juncos. So these are species that I think quite a few people don't realize are easy to confuse. I confuse them regularly. And I hear them both up at high altitudes and even low altitudes in the local area. And also when I'm in the Northeast, because I go back to Maine, typically at least twice every summer. And back there are a lot of chipping sparrows, but and fewer dark-eyed juncos. Whereas here, there are juncos all over the place. I mean, they're in my neighborhood now. I encounter them at work every day. They're just abundant. If you go higher up into the mountains, then you'll find both. At this time of the year, there aren't very many chipping sparrows singing down around, for example, suburban areas near Altadena and Pasadena. You have to go up to higher altitude most of the time to find them, like, maybe Charlton Flat, Chileo, Buckhorn, Grassy Hollow, which is where I recorded these. So in this particular example, this sonogram shows both species. They were in the same tree singing within a couple of seconds of each other. I had been tracking the chipping sparrow. This was about 10 days ago. I've been tracking the chipping sparrow with my microphone to get good recordings for this talk. And then serendipitously, the dark-eyed junco flew into the tree and started singing too. And it was singing at a distinctly slower cadence. Although it's a trill, it's a slow enough trill that even to my ear, I could hear the two different species and how they were different. Chipping sparrow was a much faster one. And to my ear, it sounds like it has a higher pitch, perhaps because it's so fast. Right now is a good time to hear both of these species. They're both singing. Blue Ridge is another place where they're singing a lot. So here's another example. This is a dark-eyed junco. This was actually at JPL last week, right next to the parking lot. This is a different kind of trill from the last one. Junco trills vary a lot. So that was the first one I showed you. Here's the second one. These are faster. They have kind of a double component to them. You can see how there's an upper part and a lower part that are appearing. These are polyphonic, which means the bird is using both sides of its syrinx, its voice box, simultaneously to produce sounds at two different pitches. Some birds do that, not all of them. So, but they vary a lot. Here's another example. These are dark-eyed junco songs. So these are some of the slow ones. They're coming in rapid trills, but bursts of them that are separated by what, maybe a tenth of a second or so, a couple tenths of a second. Here are some relatively rapid trills, but still slower than the chipping sparrow trills. More of the slow ones, more of the fast ones. When I was parking at JPL today, I heard these two patterns when I got out of the car. I mean, it's not just in the mountains. So juncos actually make a lot of different variations on their songs. Chipping sparrow songs vary too, although I don't have very many examples in the talk. We'll hear a couple of them shortly. But juncos vary a lot. And these are, of course, the juncos, the Oregon juncos we have here in California. 2 years ago, when I did a high altitude hike in Maine, up at around 4,000 feet, there were slate-colored juncos singing, and they sounded really different from this. Different enough that I didn't immediately realize what I was hearing. So be careful. We'll hear about geographic differences when we get to purple finches too. So again, it's kind of summarize what I just said. The chipping sparrow songs are often faster, but there's overlap. The relatively recent books, the Peterson Field Guide to Bird Sounds in Eastern and Western North America by Nathan Peploe, talks about this quite a bit, and he shows examples of sonograms. And he mentions that the juncos generally are slower, but that there is overlap. Some of the fast juncos overlap some of the slow chipping sparrows. So they're tricky, and I think a lot of people don't understand this. So you really need to be careful. Generally speaking, in the San Gabriel Mountains, the juncos are a lot more common. At this time of the year, though, the chipping sparrows are around, and they're singing like crazy at altitudes above like maybe 7,000 feet, and they're almost as numerous as the juncos. So you need to be careful. At lower altitudes right now, mostly it's going to be the juncos and not chipping sparrows. Grassy Hollow, Blue Ridge area, Blue Ridge Campground right now are just teeming with these birds singing. It's really kind of wonderful to hear them up there. So now, before we get to recordings, there's another species with which it's possible to confuse these. And I used to get confused by these in my neighborhood, and these are orange-crowned warblers. During the height of the pandemic, I was working at home a lot, as many of us were, and I often had the door cracked open, and I could hear things through the screen. It turns out there were a couple of orange-crowned warblers in my neighborhood in the springs of 2020 and 2021. And it took me a while to figure out how to separate them, as I hadn't heard them a lot. They also make a rapid trill. And this sonogram shows two of them. And oops, it shows two of them. The darker one is louder. It's closer. These were actually recorded in San Dimas Canyon a couple of years ago. And they're actually distinctly different in appearance in a sonogram from the chipping sparrows or the juncos, especially the dark one where it goes up and down in pitch. And when they do that, they don't always do it at the beginning of the song. Sometimes they do it in the middle. Sometimes they do it in the end. Sometimes they don't really do it much at all. But it is a potential source of confusion. These are some of the potential sources of confusion among species in our area that trill rapidly. So the orange-crowned warblers occur in our area over a wide range of elevations. That's why I'm including them in the talk. I mean, I'm hearing them here in my neighborhood. We heard a bunch of them in the Santa Monica Mountains during our Chaparral hike on Saturday morning. Quite a few of them, in fact, and they were singing like crazy. But you can also find them at high altitudes. When I've done that breeding bird survey, I've heard them singing up over 7,000 feet. I mean, historically, Islip Saddle, especially a couple tenths of a mile to the west of it on the south-facing slope, has had orange-crowned warblers. If you go there, there's a pretty good chance you'll find them there because I always got them there. So they range over a pretty diverse series of altitudes within the area. So having said all that, we're going to listen to several examples of these. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of PowerPoint, stop sharing it, and share the chipping sparrow recording. So I have a bunch of recordings now. Again, these are in eBird. Oops, I think I shared the wrong one. Let's try this again. That's not the one I meant to do. Okay, maybe, oh, it was just in the foreground, that's all. Okay, so Mark or Ron, could you confirm that you now see chipping sparrow?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so this is going to be from Grassy Hollow. No, actually, this isn't Grassy Hollow. This was recorded by Becky, who is attending the talk right now. Thank you, Becky, very much for uploading this recording. This was obtained in Lancaster in, I think, April. Yeah, April 22nd. And I'm including it because it's a good recording and it's different from the ones that I had. So let's listen to it. It's this rapid trill right here. There are other birds here too, but it's the rapid trill that I want to concentrate on. Well, it's pretty fast. It's faster than Juncos you just. So see how fast that is. So now let's try this one. So this is going to be both the chipping sparrow, which is this really dark burst of very closely spaced sounds. This is a rapid trill, followed immediately after by these slower ones, which is the Junco. This is the one I showed you a still sonogram of a couple minutes ago. They were recorded in the same tree at the parking lot at Grassy Hollow on June 8th. So let's listen to this. You have distinctly different cadences of those trills. So this is the Junco. And the Junco again. There's also a non-stickity one. Here's the chipping sparrow. There's a Junco. So these are kind of extreme examples. These are some of the slower, songs you'll hear from a Junco, and these are relatively fast ones from the chipping sparrow. Although I think Becky's recording that I played earlier, they were even faster. Okay, we don't need to do that again, which is why I wanted to show both examples of this. So I also tested this with the Merlin app, and Merlin was able to successfully identify both of these. Interestingly enough, 3 weeks ago when I was in Maine and I was surrounded by chipping sparrows, Merlin identified nearly all of them as Juncos. So you've got to be careful. Merlin sometimes is great, but other times it doesn't get it right. So here's another one. This is going to be another Junco. This was also a Grassy Hollow in a different tree next to a different parking lot. So let's listen to this one. Yeah, it's a different cadence from the last one. Faster, but not as fast. Not as fast as the chipping sparrow. The appearance in the sonogram is different. So again, right now, Grassy Hollow is a great place to hear these. Here is a different one still. So this is about 2 miles east of Buckhorn. This is at the same place where I showed you recordings of green-tailed towhees from the little dog bush. It's a little bit east of the old Vista picnic area, which unfortunately burned over 4 years ago. So there are going to be multiple songs here by a Junco. The first, it's good, excuse me, these slower ones, then a faster trill, slower ones, faster trill, and so forth. They're also down here at the bottom, these dark things at low frequencies, those are tapping sounds made by a hairy woodpecker. Here comes the slow Junco, faster Junco, slower. So you can see there's tremendous variability with the Junco songs, but generally speaking, at least with the examples that I have here, they're slower than the chipping sparrows. Okay, so what else have we got here? I've got some other ones. Let's see, did we already do this one? No, this is another one from work. Let's do this briefly. Just at the JPL parking lot. Got hordes of baby Junco again at JPL. Okay, and then now we want to wrap things up with this sequence of sounds with the orange crown warbler. This is the one that I showed a sonogram for. It's a trill, but it's different, especially when it goes up and down the pitch. With that last one, there were two of them whose songs opened up. This is listed in there. Maybe two of them. This is again in Indian mechanics. Again, I just wanted to point this out because these can be easily confused with, especially with the Juncos, at least to my ear. Okay, so let's move on from there. And so we're done with those. And our next topic is going to be, if I get this going again, we're going to talk, yeah, I said a little bit about this already, about some other things with which you could confuse them. Sorry, this is a very, very sensitive laptop. If you spend time in the Northeast, pine warblers can easily be confused with Juncos, worm-eating warblers, although they're usually higher pitched, and even swamp sparrows, although they're usually slower in cadence. So I just want to point this out. There are many sources of confusion, and if you learn the sounds in one area and you go to another one and you hear something that sounds familiar, be careful. It could just be a different species altogether. That's a very easy trap to fall into. Okay, let's go on to finches. Purple finches, Cassins, finches, and solitaires. So I discovered while preparing for this talk by recording a whole bunch of things up in the mountains about 10 days ago that the Merlin app has a really difficult time separating Cassin's finch and purple finch. Some of their songs are pretty similar. And on a personal level, I historically have had some trouble separating Cassin's finch from Townsend's solitaire. If you look at the sonograms, they don't really look all that similar. But if you're out in the field hearing something, it can be a little more challenging. And so again, I think that's another area where using one of these apps, whether it's Merlin or one of the other two, like BirdNet or Song Meter Touch, all of which generate sonograms as they happen, they're really helpful because then you can see the patterns. And they also, by default, record things. At least Merlin does. So we're going to show examples of these both with sonograms and listen to them. Oops. And in addition, the Cassin's finch and purple finch's songs they're both variable. They can be confusing. I don't have very many examples of those, in part because it's already starting to get late and I don't want to keep you here all night. But we'll go through a couple of examples. In addition, the purple finches in the Northeast, their songs are different from the purple finches here. Merlin does well with purple finches in New England, but at least at high altitudes here, it struggled. An additional complication is that purple finches in the West, not purple finches, Cassin's finches vary as well, not only just with their songs, but they sometimes mimic other birds. A few years ago, Tim Spar, Matt Young, and I were in British Columbia recording crossbills and evening grosbeaks. And we found lots of Cassin's finches that were imitating other species. They were imitating pine siskins and they were imitating red crossbills. So that's something to be aware of. I haven't heard Cassin's finch do that in California, at least not yet, but it's possible. There are also some calls that purple finches and Cassin's finches make that can be tricky to separate. We don't have time to do those tonight, maybe for version number 3 of this talk. Similarly, some of the purple finch and Cassin's vireo vocalizations are similar. Again, we don't have time to do it tonight. We'll save that for round 3 of the Confusing Bird Talks. So here are some sonograms. Here's at the top is an example of purple finch. This was recorded on Mount Wilson last summer. It's the dark stuff you see here. Generally speaking, purple finch to my ear sound as if it's sort of gradually going upward in sound, sort of. That's a terrible imitation, but Cassin's finch, when you see a sonogram, it really looks different. The ones I'm showing here in the middle sonogram, those were obtained in Blue Ridge on June 8th. And then down below at the bottom, that's a sonogram of Townsend Solitaire recorded at dusk. Basically, it's about 1.5 miles east of Islip Saddle on the Angeles Crest Highway. That was recorded about a month ago when I was on my mountain bike. Solitaires sing a lot at dusk, and so that's a great time to hear them. And right now, they're very vocal, again, at higher altitudes. The elevation differences, purple finches, of course, they could be singing down in residential neighborhoods in Pasadena right now, Altadena, La Cañada, and so forth. Cassin's finch, you're not going to hear those below like 6,000 feet, or maybe a little bit below that, but not much. You can find them, for example, at Chileo, maybe Charlton Flat, but not much lower than that. They're about 5,700 feet. The solitaires are generally going to be over 6,000 feet. The Cassin's finches, when you get to over, say, 8,000 feet, they're going to be the most numerous. They're going to be more numerous than purple finches. So we're going to play some examples of these. So let's get out of PowerPoint. I'll stop sharing PowerPoint and we'll share Purple Finch next. And let's see, I think it's this one. So again, Mark or Ron, are you seeing Purple Finch in the foreground?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So this is Purple Finch. This is hot off the presses. This was recorded by Naresh last night on Sunset Ridge, Sunset Peak. He had a better recording than I did, so I'm going to play it. It's quite a lovely recording. This was singing shortly before sunset. Really quite melodious, with a lot of up and down. They tend to come in bursts of song, lasting a couple of seconds, separated by 5 or more seconds. And they had that little twiddle at the end there. They often do that. And these songs are fairly repetitive, but each one's a little bit different. Okay, now let's compare that with one of mine. Let's see. So let's see. Oh, did I screw that up? I might have. No, this is Naresh's. This is one of mine. A little bit different. That's a distant one. Here's a close one. The second one. That was near Mount Wilson last summer. All right, let's compare that with a Cassin's finch. So this was on Blue Ridge 10 days ago. So there's some similarities. There's a lot of rapid up and down in the pitch, but not a trill. But speaking of trills, here comes one. That was a Junco. That was the Cassin's finch. Let's skip over the sparrows to get to more of the finches. I want to play a couple more examples of these. They're pretty similar, but there are variations on them, especially toward the end. Had 3 of those do things at the end. And then this one's going to be a little bit different. A sparrow and a Cassin's finch, and then another Cassin's finch. Again, a lot of up and down, and then patterns at the end that have some repetition, but they also vary. You know, there are 4 of these little deer things, and then a couple other little little flourishes at the end. So the Merlin app really struggled with this. About 3/4 of the time it got it wrong. And I know it did not only because I'm familiar with the songs, but I was looking at the birds to make sure that I got it right. And I could see them. And these were definitely Cassin's finches. All right, let's compare this with Townsend Solitaire. So these actually, if you just look at this first one, there's some broad similarities with the Cassin's finch, but with the up and down in frequency, but it's different. It's more spread out. It goes and goes and goes, which is one of the things I listen for. And when you see it displayed like this, it actually looks quite different. But in the field, when I'm just hearing, I still sometimes confuse these with the finches, especially Cassins. There's some notes here that sound more like a robin. Another one. Okay. So I just wanted to give this as an example. It's a species that I sometimes confuse with Cassin's finch, but when I see it on a sonogram like this, it really stands out as different. These also, of course, have a piercing call at a kind of like a constant pitch. There were a couple of brief examples of this at the end of some of these. That little single note is something they do as a call, which is distinct. Here's another example of it. It didn't work very well, but anyway, you won't hear that with the finches at all. So let's stop sharing this and go back to PowerPoint, get this going again and move on. And so the last group of confusing species we're going to consider are calls by red crossbills, pygmy nuthatches, and olive-sided flycatchers. On some of the trips that I lead, particularly when I take people up to high altitudes like Troop Peak or around Buckhorn, or Mount Waterman, where you could encounter all three of these species, some of the calls are similar. Now, we're not, with olive-sided flycatcher, we're not talking about the quick 3 beers vocalization. We're talking about pip, 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 pip calls. And I'll play some examples of those. Pygmy nuthatches also go pip, pip, and they do it at different cadences. Sometimes it's really fast, sometimes it's slower, hence the confusion. And they can be confused with some of the red crossbill flight calls, not the red crossbill songs, the flight calls. And you've heard me talk about the red crossbill flight calls numerous times for more than 10 years now, including an LA Birders talk I gave about 18 months ago. And we're going to concentrate on the ones that are common in the mountains in the southern part of the state, the type 2s, the most emphatic ones. Okay, we'll get to that one next. We'll get out of this and we'll go right to the recordings. So we'll stop sharing this and resume sharing the recordings. So again, we don't want that one. We don't want warblers. We don't want this one. We want this one. So here is a classic recording of type 2 red crossbills. This was recorded from Islip Saddle a few years ago. It's all of these very brief and somewhat emphatic vocalizations that you're seeing here. Oops. That was a group of birds that flying away. I flushed them off the side of the road by accident. I didn't notice them in time, and I got a brief recording before they moved away. So that's what they sound like when they're close and loud. When they're a bit more distant, then you can get something like this. So these are softer. They aren't as obvious, and they're easier to confuse with the other species, which is why I'm showing them. If you hear that, especially if it's not very loud, and then you were to hear something like this, just hear it, not see the sonogram, it's not that hard to get them mixed up. It can be easy to confuse especially from if you're someone who's not familiar with these. Like I was guiding a friend of mine from Massachusetts, and he heard these and he thought they were crossbills, and I had to tell him no, they're nuthatches. And then here, last but not least, these are the olive-sided flycatcher calls that I was talking about. Those are small. And the tips. Sometimes they do too. Usually they. So those can be confused with red crossbills as well. It's actually a fairly common vocalization by an olive-sided flycatcher instead. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here. Let's go back to PowerPoint and start wrapping things up. We're going to talk a little bit about the Merlin app. I'm going to show some examples. So I'm going to say some things that are both positive and negative about Merlin. My goal here is not to bash it, but to just point out where it has many benefits and where it still needs work. It's a phenomenal tool for helping people learn bird sounds and to introduce people to getting bird recordings, learning how to work with sonograms, obtaining recordings. And Merlin is singularly responsible for enormous numbers of bird recordings that are being entered into eBird now that can be that are being archived and can be used for many things. And it's helping people learn what the songs are. It's improving. It's getting a lot better. Eventually, it's probably going to be better than any human is when the database gets large enough. It's not there yet, though. It still makes a lot of mistakes. There are also regional versions of it. If you download it, make sure you have one that covers the area where you are. I would recommend downloading the one that covers basically all of the continental US and Canada. That covers everything. It's easy to upload Merlin recordings to eBird lists, although I really recommend that you edit them before doing that. And thousands of them are going into eBird every day, so they're making many valuable contributions. If you know what you're doing using Merlin, you can get excellent recordings with it. I've seen some gorgeous ones. There are some really nice ones that people are uploading. Let me do this. Having said that, it does make mistakes, and it makes them pretty regularly. Some users don't realize this and accept Merlin results without really thinking about it very carefully. You need to be careful. You need to know what you're doing. So caveat emptor, let the buyer beware, be careful with it. It's also not very sensitive. I've tested several apps for phones to record birds. Merlin is easily the least sensitive of them. At least I think it's the least sensitive. Song meter touch is also a bit lacking, but it's more sensitive than Merlin is. I generally, if I'm using my phone to record, I use Voice Record Pro. It's sensitive and you can adjust the gain. You can also do that with Song meter touch. With Merlin, you can't. A lot of recordings that people obtain with Merlin that they put into eBird are poor in quality. The volume is so low, it's hard to hear them. And they could be a lot better if people edited them and simply amplified them a little bit. The sounds need to be loud for Merlin to work. If possible, using Merlin, move closer. It will help. The volume of sounds goes as 1 over the distance squared, so it really helps. Get a lot closer, the sound will go up rapidly. And Merlin doesn't allow you to do any fancy stuff like change the gain or filtering to reduce background noise or to edit the files directly on a phone. Voice Record Pro and Song Meter Touch, you can edit things. As I've mentioned, Merlin regularly goofs up some of the things that I've been talking about, like Cassin and Purple Finch. It also regularly gets faint owl recordings wrong. It, at least in my experience, has frequently misidentified red-winged blackbirds where there weren't any present. I think it might have been confusing those with lesser goldfinches. Some of the mountain quail songs, it doesn't recognize them. Sounds. I've seen that happen many times. However, it's worth giving a try. I mean, it can do a lot of things, and recording with phones, using phone apps is well worth pursuing. You don't need fancy equipment to get good results. Practice it. Practice, practice, practice. Get closer if possible. Stand still. A lot of recordings of people into eBird, they're walking. It drives me up the wall because they're degrading their own recording. Just stand still. Don't move. Don't talk. Don't rustle your coat. Don't even whisper. Your phone will pick that up. So, it's worth trying to record things with your phone. If you really want to record things with your phone, consider one of these other apps. They're more sensitive and they're more capable. It's also a good idea to dictate notes to yourself at the end of the recording so you know what you were doing, what it is, where it was, and whether you think Merlin got it right. in some other talk, we'll discuss in more detail how to load the recordings onto a computer and software that will allow you to trim things and adjust the gain and so forth. Doing all of this will really help you learn bird sounds. I use my iPhone 15 and Voice Record Pro pretty frequently. It's really, really capable. So let's see, it's getting a little bit late. Let's do a couple of examples to show you how the sensitivity compares with these, and then we'll wrap things up. That'll be the end. So we'll get out of this, stop sharing this. I'll start sharing one more. Let's see, we want to get out of that and load this. So this is going, I'm going to play examples of recordings obtained with, in this case, it's going to be with Merlin. This was at sunset last Friday night in Chaparral, at an altitude of about 2,400 feet at a place called Brown Mountain Saddle. This was recorded with Merlin, just standard Merlin. Notice how soft it is? Oh, the volume is cranked all the way up. It's really soft. So let's compare that with Audacity, a recording obtained with the Audacity app. So with this app, you can adjust the gain, and I did that, although I didn't crank it all the way up. So you can clearly hear a lot more sounds. There are a bunch of different species. I mean, that's a wren tit, for example, and spotted towhee, scrub jay, and so forth. So if you're interested in recording things with a phone, my recommendation is to use, basically is to use Voice Record Pro. It's the best of the ones that are currently available. It has adjustable gain. It's more sensitive, and I use it regularly. So this summarizes some of the things that I've already been saying. June is a perfect month to record birds with a phone. Everything is singing, and often you can get quite close and get some good recordings. So I think with that, I'll stop here because we are running a little bit late. We've been going for just over an hour, and I want to save time for questions and feedback. So thanks a lot for listening as we've gone through all this. And yeah, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And thanks a lot for tuning in for the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lance. That was wonderful. Yeah, please put any questions in the Q&A. It helps us keep track of them. And oops, I turned my video off. And
okay.
So Lance, it's too convenient to use as a recording device.
Okay, Ron, I'm afraid I heard only about a third of what you said. It broke up.
I broke up. Yeah, I said it's too bad about Merlin not being the best or not being very good at recording, because it's extremely easy to use.
It's very easy.
In fact, it happens automatically.
Yeah, it automatically records as a default. Song Meter Touch immediately displays a scrolling sonogram too, but it doesn't default to recording it. And BirdNet, if you try that, will also display, and there's an app for that for your phone as well as an app for a computer. The phone app will automatically generate a sonogram, but you have to tell it what part you want to record. Voice Record Pro does not generate a sonogram. I wish it did, but it doesn't. But it is more sensitive than the others. I mean, Merlin does a lot of wonderful things. I mean, again, I'm not trying to bash it, but you have to be careful when using it. Don't take what it says uncritically. I mean, to give an extreme example, in late April, I was up at the Buckhorn Dayuse area recording. This was part of America's Birdiest County that we do every year. And I was curious to see what Merlin would do with some fox sparrows. So I recorded it, and Merlin identified the fox sparrows as a sooty grouse. That is arguably the most spectacular failure I've ever seen. So be careful. So I see a couple of comments here. So
did you have indigestion or something? What you're going, you're going.
I should have included that recording in the talk, because I still have it. It was just bizarre. I mean, I would love to have found a sooty grouse and buckhorn. I think it would be the first record for LA County. Um,
Yeah,
sorry,
that's
they don't usually occur down here. So yeah, so Naresh and Alexander both mentioned some other common things that we get mixed up. The Merlin gets mixed up, like yeah, Rufus and Allen's hummingbirds. Yeah, indigo bunting,
Mhm.
Lasley bunting. Around here, there aren't very many indigo buntings, but they do occur occasionally. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and Alexander points out yellow-breasted chat and Bullock's oriole. Yeah, I hadn't thought about those. That's a interesting point.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, and
We
sometimes
do
Um,
have a couple
Merlin
of questions.
and sometimes Merlin just doesn't even hear what you're
well,
trying to
that's part of
record.
what I'm trying to. Yeah, one of the things I'm saying is that Merlin. I mean, I regularly can hear sounds that don't show up on the Merlin recordings. You
Yeah,
can
yeah.
look at the sonogram it generates, and it's just not there. And they aren't things that are super soft. I mean, yes, I'm fortunate that I have pretty good hearing for somebody who's in his late 50s, but I mean, these aren't sounds that are really, really faint. It's just
Mhm.
Merlin, as currently configured, does not have sensitivity. I'm sure that they could adjust that, and I hope that in the future they will. I think it would improve the power of it quite a
Mhm.
bit. All right, so
So we'd have some questions.
Yeah.
So Pete asks, uh, why do you recommend not using high pass low cut filter?
well, I do recommend using a low cut filter. I definitely do. I mean, it's just that Merlin can't do it. I'm not aware really of the phone apps that do. I mean, anybody who knows otherwise, tell me. I mean, Naresh, you've used these too. If you're aware of any of the phone apps that allow you to apply a low cut filter, tell me. But I mean, the phone apps, they use the microphone that's built in, and by definition, they're all omnidirectional microphones. Now, this is assuming you're just using the microphone that's built in. If you connect an external microphone to your phone, then it's a different story because the external microphones usually do have a low cut capability. And that can filter out things like noise from waves or traffic or wind or airplanes, that kind of thing. I do recommend using that, but the phone apps by themselves, I'm not aware that they actually let you do it. Um, you can process it afterward, you can filter it out afterward, but um, I generally don't do that. If you look at the protocols that the eBird folks mentioned for uploading recordings, they really prefer that you don't do that in post-processing, that you don't filter out low frequency sounds. They recommend normalizing to amplify the sounds, or maybe cropping off stuff here and there if there's like a lot of handling noise at the beginning or end. But they don't really recommend you do much more processing. They prefer that you leave it alone. Because if you take it out, it's gone. If you leave it in there, someone can always process your file later and do something with it. There might be some signal in there that's important to somebody that you don't think is important, but it could be. So they recommend you just leave it alone.
Right.
So
Hmm.
that's a long answer, but that's
Okay,
I
no,
think
it's good.
the
Good answer. Robert says, to me, a solitaire is a thrush trying to sing like a Pacific wren.
Well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, generally I find the Pacific Wrens it goes, keeps on going. As do the winter wrens in the Northeast. Um,
Hmm. Um,
right.
okay, so Janet asks, what's the best way to contribute to the Merlin database? Are my recordings done with Merlin automatically entered into their database, or do I need to upload them into eBird, or is there some other way?
Well, so when you obtain a recording with Merlin, it gives you the option of uploading it. Um, and so that means, if I remember correctly, I think that means it's just going to go into the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's collection. Um, or if you enter them into an eBird list, then it goes into that collection. Now, whether they're used for improving Merlin is another story. So I actually, a couple of years ago, took the training that the Cornell Lab people offered to learn how to improve Merlin by, basically doing all these things with sonograms to add to the database. And the way it works is you have a bunch of recordings. It generates a visual version of the recording. So it generates the sonogram, and then you use a box with the appropriate software to highlight the sounds made by the species that you're most interested in helping it understand better. And then you just add hundreds of those, hundreds of individual
Hmm.
examples. And so the louder they are, the better it is for Merlin. for using it for that purpose to train Merlin. And they want, I think, something on the order of 1,000 examples of each one before they release it to the public in the next Merlin update. Broadly speaking, I know that that isn't a precise number, but it's something like that. So they might use it, they might not. You can't really tell in advance if your recording is going to be used that way. When I went through the training, they had selected a bunch of examples, and they were all really good recordings with loud volume. I think Merlin and the other things that use neural networks struggle when the signal strength is low, when it's fainter.
Mhm.
It kind of makes sense. I mean, we struggle when it's faint too, when it's a soft sound.
Sure.
Great, thank you. Robert asks, is it easier to count to 3 on a chipping sparrow, Juncos end just before 3 or right after 2? I guess you're counting the pace of the trill. That's the
Well, I'm not quite sure what to make of that question. I mean, broadly speaking, the Juncos, the trills are slower, and that's what I've noticed in my experience. But it's also mentioned multiple times in Nathan Peplow's books on the Peterson Guide to bird sounds in North America. But there are some Junco songs that are almost as fast or as fast as chipping sparrows, and in those situations, what I would also recommend is trying to see the bird. And if you can't see it and understanding its geographic distribution, that's why I mentioned earlier about my experience in Maine recently. The area around my sister's house is loaded with chipping sparrows right now, but the Juncos clear out. They aren't at that altitude very much. And so most of the ones I'm hearing are chipping sparrows. So the knowledge of their temporal, seasonal, and geographic distributions can be useful too. Bring all of your potential sources of information to bear on some of these confusing things, not just the sounds.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish I could give you a better answer, but that's what has worked for me.
Mm-hmm. Alexander says, about a month ago, I was on Mount Pinos, and both my ear and Merlin heard lots of house finches, about 6,000 feet in elevation. Should I trust the identification?
Well, so if you use Merlin, you still have the recordings. I mean, you can double check those. They can be confused with purple finches and Cassin's finches, and some of the brief calls can also be confused with red crossbill flight calls. So yeah, generally speaking, you wouldn't expect to find house finches at that kind of altitude, but there are buildings I'm pretty sure, fairly near that altitude on Mount Pinos. So it's possible. I mean, 10 days ago when I was up at Big Pines, there were house finches, purple finches, and Cassin's finches all singing at that parking lot by that wet meadow. I heard a house finch up at Grassy Hollow at 7,400 feet. They aren't really common there, but they can get there. So it's conceivable. But if you have an eBird list, Alexander, put your recordings in there and we can take a look at it. But please amplify them before you do it to make it a little bit easier to hear them.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Robert asks, is it Voice Record Pro or Voice Record Pro with 2 V and O capitalized?
Well, I think it's
that might be
or version 7. And so I have version 7 loaded on my phone. There are different versions floating around. When I bring it up on my phone, it says Voice Record Pro 7, but I've seen others that just say Voice Record Pro. I don't really know the differences, whether there's some substantial difference between those or not. And for the sake of completeness, I'm using an iPhone with the most recent operating system. It's an iPhone 15. So that may or may not be related to it.
Okay, great. Alexander says, I think Tom Miko asked this question a while earlier. Do you recommend attaching an external microphone onto your phone to record? And if so, what are some tips to using such setups?
Okay, yeah, that's a more kind of a sophisticated question. And if you have such a device, great, go for it. In the sound recording talk I did in September of 2020, I went through some examples of that. And a microphone, for example, like this one. So this is a Sennheiser microphone. This can be attached to a phone. You need a special adapter cable to do it. but you can get those. And in that talk I gave, I described how to do it. But at that time, I was using an iPhone 5 SE, which was different from the ones now. But yeah, there are ways you can do it. You needed to have not only a cable adapter, but there was also a little gadget with a single battery in it that was necessary as well. And it cost something like 45 or $50 to get the converter cables to do that. The device I used, which I still have, is called an iRig Pre, and it enabled me to connect any one of my microphones, any one of my big microphones to my phone. I don't bother doing that anymore. I just carry my other recorders with me. But you could do that, and it would certainly improve your directionality, would greatly improve the sensitivity. It would enable you to implement a low-cut filter because the microphones have those built into them. Most of them do. So it'll give you a more capable system, yes. But if you do that, don't bother with Merlin. Use Voice Recorder Pro. It's much better. It's more capable. You can adjust things there too.
Yeah.
Don't see the sonic.
Great.
That's the only drawback.
Okay, great. An anonymous person asks, have you noticed any differences between lower elevation urban juncos and high elevation migratory wild juncos? How about Swinhoe's white eyes mimicking finches and other things?
So I'll answer the last part of that first. I personally have not noticed the white eyes mimicking a lot of other things, but I don't hear them all that much. They're mostly along the coast, and I live up in the foothills. I hear them only a couple of times a year. So I mean, maybe you, Mark, or Naresh, or somebody else who hears those more could answer that better than I could. I just don't hear them a lot, so I don't know them all that well. In terms of differences in elevation, well, to tell you the truth, I haven't really noticed very many differences. I mean, some of the sounds that I played you tonight for the Juncos, I've been hearing at the JPL parking lot at an altitude of about 1,100 feet just in the last day. And I heard some of the same sounds up on Blue Ridge at almost 8,000 feet 10 days ago. Now, that's a very small sample. I haven't attempted to do any systematic comparison of, large numbers of songs recorded at different elevations. Maybe the group at UCLA who's actively studying Juncos could answer that better than I could. I mean, didn't we have them give a talk? No, maybe I'm thinking something else. Yeah, there's a group there that's really studying all things about Juncos, especially the urban kind of, aspect of Juncos right now. And maybe they've noticed something about this because they've got like several grad students who've been working on this. Pamela Yates' group, I think, at UCLA has been they were like the world's experts on urban and suburban Juncos now. So a good question, but I haven't noticed anything myself.
That'd be good.
Oh,
Great.
yeah, good comment, Brad, about Stellar's jays. Yeah, Stellar's jays are notorious mimics. They mimic all kinds of stuff. They're well known to mimic hawks, especially. Actually, I've heard them imitate red-tailed hawks more. A few years ago, Darren Dowell got a very good but confusing recording. I think it was at Chileo of a Stellar's jay doing a beautiful imitation of a Type 2 red crossbill. I couldn't tell them apart, but Darren knows what it was because he was looking at the jay when it did it. And so, yeah, you got to be careful. Yeah, the jays are some jays are very good mimics. Blue jays in the east are also great mimics. Okay, how are we doing? Are we
Fantastic.
We're
I
doing great.
think we're out of questions.
Yes.
You have any others?
Looks like
Nope.
nothing is showing up in the Q&A.
No, I think we're all set. Lance, thank you very much. That was a wonderful talk. And it will be great getting this recording up on YouTube so others can partake also. Thank you. If you're a member of Lab, well, obviously you're a member of Lab if you're watching the talk tonight. And thank you very much for your support. Next month, we have turns. So keep an eye out for that. And anything else? Any final comments, Lance?
Well, thanks for all the feedback in the chat and all the questions. Yeah, I mean, the one about the chipping sparrows being longer, that's another good point. I hadn't thought to mention that. They often are longer than the Juncos. Yeah, I mean, I still have to bone up on those every spring when I start hearing the chipping sparrows sing. And even the Juncos keep
Absolutely.
surprising me. I mean, I keep hearing songs from them that I didn't know they make. So, all right, thanks
Absolutely.
everybody,
Absolutely.
and thanks a lot for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
and we're
everyone,
looking
and we'll see
forward
you next
to
time.
part 3
Yes,
Okay,
coming soon.
coming
Thank you,
soon.
everyone. And thank you again, Lance. Take care, everyone. Good
all right,
night.
Thank you.
all right.
Goodbye.
Good night, folks. All right, bye-bye.